So welcome to Mex Moves, our weekly podcast on Mexico business and finance for the global audience. How are you, Eduardo?
Doing well, Damien. How are you?
Great, thanks. It's a busy week as it's Mexico earnings week. Most Mexican companies are reporting. But this week we have an interview with Sebastián de Lara. Sebastián is the Chief Regulation and Expansion Officer at Finsus. Finsus, as many of you will know, is a leading Mexico fintech. It's a SOFIPO, which is a sort of popular bank looking for a bank license. But unusually, Finsus is profitable by many measures, and it's not funded by global VC, but by local money. So we'll get a sense of how Finsus is operating and how it's been able to achieve good numbers so far. And I think we'll also talk about the Aeroméxico upcoming IPO, which has been filed. We'll talk about the GE Vernova paying over $5.3 billion to Signux for 50% of its JV. Big deal, one of the biggest ever M&A deals in Mexico. The deal on insurance companies, which didn't get a lot of international attention at least, but it's actually a pretty sizable deal, might have saved the Mexican and global insurance companies $8 or $9 billion in back taxes. A great Reuters story on energy smuggling and an effective crackdown on that by the Mexican government. And then a little bit on GM, reported great results. Stock was up the day it reported, I think, 15%, and partly to do with tariffs from Mexico being less than they expected. And then Revolut announced that it finally got its operating license. So these are some of the issues that we're going to discuss today. Eduardo, why don't you kick off with your take on the Aeroméxico announcement on its upcoming IPO?
Yeah, well, this is something that was expected, but finally they released the information about the return to the markets. It will be a dual offering, both in the US and in Mexico. It will also be a primary offering, in other words, new shares, and a secondary offering, which means that some of its current shareholders would unload some of the shares that they own in the airline. Aeroméxico is very well known. It's Mexico's flagship airline. It went into bankruptcy procedure due to the pandemic in March of 2022, but it's come out of it, and now it's ready to go back and and list its shares in the New York Stock Exchange and in the Mexican Bolsa. The expected price of the shares, it's between 18 and 20 US dollars. It also has an over-allotment issue that will be acquired by the underwriters in the next 30 days after the sale. And the company has been performing better than expected, or at least it has posted revenue of around $5 billion. At least that was the last number that we have for 2023, which was 30% above the 22 level. And operating income was reported around $750.8 million. So Aeroméxico is ready to be back in the market. The money that they will raise will be to upgrade its fleet, replace some of the smaller aircrafts that they own, to increase the seats per flight, premium seats that they offer. So it's going to be interesting to see how the market reacts. Some of the shareholders that will be unloading shares will be Apollo Global Management, which came into Aeroméxico under the bankruptcy procedures, and some of its local Mexican investors like Eduardo Tricio, the owner of Grupo Lala, the Mexican consumer products company, and Actinver. So we'll wait and see how the market receives it. Another investor that will be acquiring a stake in the company will be the Par Capital Management Group, which will purchase approximately 25 million of common shares from Aeroméxico at a 5% discount from the IPO price. So Aeroméxico will also get that vote of confidence from that private equity company. So I think it's a good news that we have Aeroméxico coming back to the Mexican market. What do you think, Damien?
Eduardo, I think first of all, it's great news for Mexico's capital markets. That's going to be another IPO, also a stock that's used to be listed in the market was delisted after Apollo took its stake at the time of the COVID crisis, and it's a very well known name. It's gone through a couple of bankruptcies over the years, but it seems to be very well managed. If you look at the numbers, it's generating very good margins, very good cash flow. It paid a large dividend last year, so they've already the shareholders that came in at the time of COVID, mainly Apollo, already made a good return on their investment. So I think that the second thing is to marvel at Andrés Conesa, who's the CEO of Aeroméxico, who's been the CEO of Aeroméxico for a very long time now, decades, and he's seen the ups and downs of the industry, and he navigated Aeroméxico through the COVID crisis, helping secure the Apollo DIP financing, the basic emergency financing. Third, I think it's interesting that it took a global private equity fund, Apollo namely, to bail out Aeroméxico. There wasn't significant Mexican capital available at the time to do that deal or willing to take the risk. They did, and they got handsomely compensated for that when this deal goes through. So I think it's good. I think what we're seeing in the airline sector is it's a challenge. It's a slightly challenging year. Trump's immigration policies are affecting cross-border travel, but they're affecting more the low end, especially Volaris, and less the business end, which is more Aeroméxico. So they're less exposed. There's still some uncertainty over Trump administration seeking to end the alliance between Delta, which as we saw is a major shareholder in Aeroméxico, and the code sharing agreement that generates handsome efficiency gains for both and sales gains for both sides. I read that Delta and Aeroméxico are suing to the US government to block their ending of this alliance, which would end at the end of this year, I understand. So we'll see how that goes. It's going to go through the courts, but obviously doing the IPO through that uncertainty suggests that one, it's not a huge deal. If it was a huge deal, you probably wouldn't be able to do the IPO. And I think the way the book runners will likely position it, and the company will likely position it, is if we get to block the US administration on this, there's even more upside. That if the code sharing agreement is ended, the company's still healthy and still making good cash flow. As a Mexican consumer, a user of airlines, I guess the only disappointing thing is, and I don't know if you've noticed the same thing, Eduardo, it costs a lot more money to fly to Monterrey or New York on Aeroméxico or any other airline, but especially the more premium airlines than it used to cost, pre-COVID. We're paying. I mean, obviously, like any company, the customers are paying for the profit margin that's been achieved. Now, it's not only the customers paying higher prices, that also Aeroméxico was able to negotiate with the unions during COVID, during the crisis, a much more attractive contract that built into or allowed for much greater flexibility for pilots and crew. That had one of the things that had held back Aeroméxico because they couldn't utilize their assets, basically the airplanes, as efficiently as the low-cost airlines because of the many restrictions that the unions placed in terms of hours they could fly. So it's a combination of higher fares with Mexicana out and Interjet out, and efficiency gains, partly driven by labor agreements and other agreements that they were able to get as part of the Apollo DIP financing back in 2020. That was a condition for Apollo coming in and rescuing the airline. So looks like a happy ending, capitalism at work, but we are paying some higher prices as a result of that.
No doubt. You're right on that one, Damien. Like you, I think it has a great service, Aeroméxico. I know some of the people that are running the company. It's a great company, but it's a bit higher in its price than some of its competitors, but the service is different as well. I think that's what differentiates it from its rivals. I forgot to mention that the valuation of the company might turn out to be around 2.6, 2.7 billion with this transaction. And like you said, it's not a big deal. It's not yet clear how many shares they will sell and what will be the price, but the estimate value of the transaction is around $275 million. So we'll have to wait. So the details are finalized to get those numbers exactly. But it's good that an airline of the stature and history of Aeroméxico is back in the market for investors to buy it or not.
So moving on, Eduardo, GM reported good results for the third quarter. The stock, I think, was up 15% after it reported best day in 5 years. And there are a bunch of reasons behind GM's strong performance, been performing well recently anyway. But one of the reasons was they were able to report lower tariff exposure than they had initially guided for. And they were able to do that, one, because which isn't good for Mexico, they were able to move some production to the US and therefore reduce the tariffs they were paying on Mexico, from their Mexico source car parts and cars. But also the Trump administration is basically allowing the US car companies in particular to claw back tariffs up to about, I think it's 3.75% of a vehicle's value. And so those tariffs in the end are creditable up to a certain point, and that turned out to alleviate the tariffs that are being paid. And on that note, Eduardo, the end of last week, the Trump administration, which is good news for the car companies, but also for Mexico, they expanded this program of granting automakers relief from tariffs on imported car parts. The updated program allows manufacturers to apply for these credits, 3.75% of a vehicle's value, until 2030. And I think it was going to end at 2027. So they've got another kind of 3 or 4 years to continue to claw back the tariffs that they're paying as a percent, up to a certain percent of the car sales. Now, in the conference call, GM talked about how, and I think these conference calls are partly a sort of PR gesture with the U.S. government. They talked about how much they're going to be investing in the U.S. Going forward. Talked about a $4 billion investment in Tennessee, Kansas, and Michigan, and America First, and which is obviously Mary Barra, the CEO of GM, has been there for a while now, is very adept at managing the political and public affairs process in the U.S. But even if there's some exaggeration, clearly Trump's America First sort of policy from the perspective of investment, and there are a lot of other issues such as consumer prices, is kind of working. The U.S. companies are announcing big investments in the U.S., and they're certainly not announcing big investments in Mexico. So that's the sort of the negative side to this, which is that they're putting their money to work from a Mexico perspective in the U.S. But I think GM is probably one of the 3 or 4 largest companies in Mexico. If you add up the whole GM ecosystem, including the car parts companies that that mostly sell to GM. The fact that GM is doing well, the fact that the balance sheet looks very strong, it's generally good for Mexico from that perspective. And I'm sure that going forward, when some of the Trump headlines become less prominent, and maybe Trump, stops being president, GM will continue to invest heavily in Mexico.
Yeah, they won't advertise as much as their investments in the Michigan area or the other places that you mentioned, Damien, of course. But I think that what you highlighted about that 3.75% credit is crucial. It hasn't been covered in the Mexican press, but I think it's crucial for Mexico, as it's something that lowers the burden of those tariffs placed on Mexican cars and auto parts. So I think that was very good news. And like you said, it's great for Mexico that GM is doing well because it's one of the three large U.S. companies that is heavily invested in this country. So if the negotiation of the free trade agreement goes well and Trump starts becoming less aggressive on its tariff stand, which he has already started to backtrack a little bit by giving a lot of exemptions to a lot of products from different countries and so on and so forth. And as inflation in the US picks up a little bit more because of that, he will probably say less. And as companies announce more in the US, I think on the backdrop, Mexico will benefit from all this, like you said. So overall, very good news, I think, too, in terms of what GM's strategy is going forward and what the US government might do forward as well in terms of its tariffs or reducing them or whatever they can, or whatever the Mexican government can accomplish in the renegotiation of the USMCA. So let's keep an eye on that one.
Good. Now, there was also a very large M&A deal, which I guess highlights the continued U.S. interest in Mexico, at least in certain sectors. GA Vernova, the General Electric spin-off focused on energy infrastructure, among other things, said that it was going to pay $5.275 billion for 50%. So of its Prolec joint venture from Mexico's privately owned Signix group. It's Prolec. GE Vernova said in its press release that Prolec expects $3 billion in revenue with a 25% EBITDA margin. So it's got EBITDA of $750 million or so. So it's a very highly profitable company. There's a great discussion of this by René Lankenhauer in White Paper 10, that podcast. And anyone who wants more details, I recommend they listen to what René, who knows a lot about this, has to say. I think that it's a month or so back, we talked about McCormick and Company buying an additional 25% stake in its JV with Grupo Ardes for $750 million, also at quite high valuations. And we made the point that this valuation arbitrage between Mexico and the US could drive M&A, with US companies being valued now with US markets at record highs. Many US companies trading at sort of double-digit EBITDA or even 18 times EBITDA. Mexican companies still trading at sort of mid to high single-digit EV/EBITDAs. Both sides gain from a transaction, which from the Mexican perspective is very, very attractive. But for the US, it's still accretive. Now, in this case, obviously the seller is private, so there isn't a public valuation arbitrage. But at the end of the day, they're looking at it in the same way as Grupo Ardes would look at it, which is this is a great multiple. Gives them a lot of capital to grow in other areas, and for GE, this gives them full control over the business. So Prolec was founded about 30 years ago by Signix and GE. It has about 10,000 people globally. Most of their employees are in the US. I think they have 5 plants in the US, 2 in Mexico. And the Mexican operations comply with USMCA rules of origin, so they can export tariff-free. And apparently the valuation is about 14 times EBITDA or 3.5 times sales. So that's obviously a very high multiple. Signix continues with its remaining businesses with cables, cold cuts, snacks. It's a kind of classic Monterrey conglomerate with very diversified businesses. And Signix will remain a very large company with as much as sort of $3.5 billion in revenues, 400 million in EBITDA. In René's podcast, he links this very much to interest in data centers, Prolec being an important supplier to data centers. So that would be one reason that GE is taking this move. What's your take?
Yeah, well, I think the valuations that you mentioned that benefits both ends of the transaction are, I think, what are driving probably as well the large increase in the Mexican stock market that we've seen this so far the year. I think it was punished for quite a while, and now we are seeing that as these transactions show that Mexico assets could be a little bit undervalued for what they are generating in terms of cash flow and so on. And the transaction also highlights, like you said, the growing interest in data centers in this country that we've talked about it extensively in this podcast. And that I don't know if you saw, but that the government just launched 34 projects for private investors to generate electricity. I think the things might be starting to align on that arena. There's still a lot of questions, but this transaction, what we've talked about in terms of the need for more energy, data centers, and so on and so forth, seems to be coalescing in something that will be very beneficial for Mexico, and the valuation of Mexican companies is being now revalued and taken advantage of in certain way by those that can acquire at a discount the price of Mexican assets.
Yeah, I probably should have mentioned exactly what Prolec GE produces. It's power transformers, so large units used by utilities to step electricity up or down across the grid, distribution transformers, smaller devices in neighborhoods, and specialty transformers, which is used a lot in wind farms, data centers, industrial plants, and high voltage transmission lines. So it's very much at the epicenter of the sort of the data center boom. So moving on, Revolut finally got its banking license, as you would have seen, Eduardo. Yeah, I know. I've been reading stories about Revolut, about to initiate, banking operations in Mexico for about 4 years now. I think it's been quite a saga. Then they got their sort of banking license, quote unquote, back in December, and now they've got their operating banking license last week, and now, and apparently in the next few weeks, they'll be taking customers. So it's kind of different to how some of the other fintechs have played, who have sort of migrated from lower level licenses, IFPEs, which are basically wallets, and then or Sofipos like Plata, and then they move, and right now Nu is a Sofipo, Clara is a Sofipo, Stories is a Sofipo, which is sort of popular bank, and then they migrate to the full banking license. But once they've migrated, they've already got a big business. In the case of Nu, they've got 13 million customers. Revolut went down a different route, basically saying we're going for the full banking licenses, and until we get that, we're not going to build a business. So they're kind of starting from scratch, which puts them, not from scratch in the sense that they have obviously invested a massive amount of time and money in governance, in systems, people, developing their products, but they don't actually have, as commonly understood, any customers until they kick up operations, they kickstart operations. So now it's important because Revolut is, along with Nu, the biggest fintech in the world. They've recently valued, according to Insurer, the FT, at $75 billion. They're obviously huge in Europe, and they've done I'm a happy customer in Europe, and they've done a great job at making it super easy to open an account, transfer money, save money, invest in the stock market, buy insurance. It's kind of financial super app in some respects. What Revolut doesn't really do in a significant way, and apparently it's not going to do in Mexico, at least to begin with, is credit. Now, the problem there, as I see it at least, is that credit is about 75% of the profit pool of the banking sector in Mexico and in other places. So if you're not going to be offering credit, or if that's not your expertise, how are you going to make money? And you're limiting yourself to the other 25%. And the problem about the other 25%, which is sort of payments and fees on payments and deposits and so on, is that it's you need scale, especially in Mexico, to be profitable. It's very, the margins are so thin that if you don't have huge scale, and Revolut's obviously starting much later than everyone else, not even mentioning the incumbent banks. And the other issue is that they're clearly going to be focusing a lot on remittances, and we all know about how wonderful the remittance market is and how inefficient it allegedly is. But actually, remittance fees have come down a lot, and you can see that in difficult results. Western Union has reported, Remit has reported, and so on. You've got new fintech players in remittances. I'm a big fan of Felix Pago, which you can transfer money for a very low fee through WhatsApp, which pretty much everyone in Mexico has. And then the back end, which the customer doesn't really care about, is basically using stablecoin. It's linked to SPAY, and that works really well. So getting into the remittance market isn't trivial, and it isn't this kind of, everyone talks about remittance fees being 5% and lots of money to be made. It's a lot more challenging than that, and obviously there are some fees that are that high, but there are reasons for it. They offer like Electra does, Coppel does. They offer access, physical access. They have distribution in every village, almost every village in Mexico. So they're paying for these very high operating costs to maintain that physical distribution. But if you go to digital, which is where Revolut's going to be, fees are much lower than that, and everyone is kind of going after that business. Now, people have been counting, saying that Revolut's not going to succeed in pretty much every country it's gone into, and it's been enormously successful. And so I certainly wouldn't want to underestimate it, but I just think that the challenges are real. And if they don't go into credit, to begin with, at least the profit pool is quite low and fiercely competitive, and no one wants to give Revolut a free pass.
I wonder whether, like you're saying, they're getting in a little bit late after all the saga that they went through to get this license. And like you said, it's a crowded market. In fintech, we have all these players already here operating with clients. Remesas, the government has done a good job in advertising the competition between them to lower the fees. They've come down, as you said. It'll be challenging to see. It will be interesting to see what they actually do and bring to the market that it's different from other players already here. Nobody wants to discount Revolut because of the success he has had everywhere. Young kids like it. I know for sure that they appreciate what they offer, but it's a long and winding road for them to succeed, I guess. But hey, we are believers in competition, so the more the merrier, I guess. But they will have a tough ride ahead of them.
Moving on, Eduardo, there was a brilliant story in Reuters on Wednesday about how the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, I guess you'd say in English, has orchestrated a very sophisticated fuel smuggling operation using a dark fleet of tankers carrying U.S. sourced diesel into Mexico. The story goes into this tanker Tom Agnes. It alone offloaded some 122,000 barrels off the port of Ensenada in Mexico in March of this year. And it's a relatively small port. Ensenada apparently doesn't have the infrastructure. And then there were convoys of trucks going overnight, siphoning off the fuel. The story says that the Texas-based trader, so Americans are allegedly involved in this, bought the diesel in Canada and declared it as lubricants to avoid Mexico's excise tax. So when you buy gasoline in Mexico, as I think probably everyone listening knows, like anywhere in the world, there's a big excise tax. But if you can buy the fuel in the US and bring it to Mexico and declare it as something else like lubricants, you can and then sell it to gas stations illegally or just on the highways, which you see a lot of in Mexico. You can avoid that tax, and that seems to be what what was happening here. And the recipient company in Mexico that Reuters just called Intansa SA was suspected of being a front for the CJ. For the Cartel de Nueva Generación de Jalisco. And this story coincided with comments in the morning press conference that was picked up by Bloomberg, that the government said that they had saved almost $11 billion this year by cracking down on fuel smuggling, which is pretty, and that they're on scale to make maybe $15 billion, $14 billion full year 2025 in saved taxes by cracking down on the smuggling. And it's not just, although it's a huge tax issue, saving $11 billion, it's almost 1% of GDP or so. It's also, there's had a lot of ramifications in the fuel market in Mexico, this pervasive contraband. Shell recently announced, the British Dutch oil company, that it was exiting its gas station business. So under Peña Nieto, the previous president, there was a kind of flood of new global companies going into gas stations, Valero, Shell, among others. And they basically haven't been able to make the money that they had expected. And there are different reasons for that, but one of the reasons for sure is the prevalence and of what's called huachicoleo fiscal, illegally imported oil. And this news that they've cracked down on nearly $11 billion this year is great, both for the public finances, but also for the companies, many of them which are US and European, that have tried to get into the gas market and had found this kind of unfair competition. It does make you wonder, Eduardo, if the government has so far saved $11 billion this year, where did that $11 billion go to last year? And who was enriched? But those are subjects probably beyond the remit of this podcast.
Yeah, but it's amazing the size of how this smuggling of contraband fuel has come to in Mexico. And $11 billion might not sound a lot, but it's huge when you think about it. And who is profiting from that? Obviously, there must be a lot of money doled out to customs and, I don't know, officials and transport companies. It's huge. I think the government is finally taking the right attitude towards this, even though it might involve officials that are close to their heart. We don't know, and I have no way of proving it. But it's an amazing story, I gotta say. I mean, I hadn't heard about the Ensenada port. I had heard about the Tamaulipas ports. I had heard about these big tankers coming in with allegedly lubricants, but having diesel or gasoline on them. And the disruption to the marketplace is tremendous, as you said, Damien. So I hope this could be cracked down. And the US has a lot to say on this too, maybe, or Canada has to say about this too. But it's a huge bootlegged system, I guess, that disrupts and generates a lot of damage to a lot of people. And we hope they continue to dismantle these operations. It's not going to be easy, I'm sure, but hopefully they're doing it, and one wants to do it for the benefit of everybody, I guess. I mean, the government is losing a lot of revenue, and that's a big incentive for them to crack down on it. But there are other incentives.
That's right. Someone was telling me that official, legal imports of fuel gasoline into Mexico, and you can look this up in the data if you know how to crawl Mexico government databases, which is no easy task. They're up about 30% this year, whereas gasoline sales probably up about 2 or 3%. So that gap reflects that that this crackdown is not PR. It's been hugely successful. They've thrown some people in jail, some nephews of the former Navy chief in the previous administration, and I'm sure, and the U.S. has also taken action against U.S. participants, and I'm sure that both the U.S. and the Mexican authorities interviewing all the people they've caught involved in this and getting information from them to work through the chain of command. And as we've saw in this Reuters story, the drug cartels are intimately involved, and that's another reason why the U.S. is quite focused on this, because this money is going to some of this money at least is going to the drug cartels, and that is making them stronger, more powerful, and therefore more potent threats. So it's a key priority, and to the credit of the government, it's working. But I think we also need to see accountability for what happened in the past. Now, moving on, Eduardo, there was a big deal struck in the last few days, as you may have seen, in the insurance sector. Basically, as I understand it, the Mexico tax authorities had claimed that the big insurance companies in Mexico and small insurance companies for that matter, had incorrectly claimed VAT that they paid as a credit against VAT that they owed, and over decades, and that the back taxes owed were $9 billion. Now, I mean, if people think that's just kind of theoretical, as you may have seen this week, Netflix stock went down after reporting earnings almost 10%. And a big factor behind Netflix stumble after being such a stellar performer for so long was a tax deal they reached with the Brazilian tax authorities for $619 million for reasons too complex to go into today, but basically the Brazilian authorities claimed that Netflix wasn't paying the tax that it owed over many years, and so these tax charges, if you start accumulating them, and you're in a big country like Mexico or Brazil for that matter, and then there are penalties and so on for not paying, can start being meaningful at a global level. And AXA, the French insurance company, had been taking Mexico, through to arbitration courts in Europe. Carlos Slim has a big insurance company through his financial group in Bursa. Has obviously been bringing this up a lot because they're one of the affected parties, MetLife. So this was getting to the very highest levels of government, heads of state levels, because of the size of it. Anyway, the deal reached is, in simple terms, is they're not going to have to pay the 9 billion or so back taxes on the VAT dispute, but they are so that's basically a huge victory for the insurance companies. On the other hand, they are going to have to pay, now the law is being changed to make it explicit and remove any ambiguity. They're going to have to pay this VAT going forward, and that will mean higher premiums, and which ultimately the customers will pay to a large extent. So it won't affect directly the insurance companies, or not nearly as much as it would have affected them had they had to pay the back taxes. Qualitas, which I think is the only kind of pure insurance company listed in the stock market, also reported earnings, and it estimated that these various changes will hit earnings by a couple of billion pesos, about 20% of pre-tax profit, and that the overall industry impact is going to be about $1 billion, which is a lot less than it could have been. And the result, I think, is generally speaking, a positive one, and in this case, at least distinguishes Mexico from Brazil, which had not backed down and managed to extract its money from Netflix.
Yeah, I had heard about that the negotiations were really tough, Damien. That the fight over this was not, let's say, in pleasant terms. There was a lot of concerns from the insurance industry regarding this interpretation of the back taxes on the IVA, as you mentioned. It seems like the resolution was well taken, from what I've heard from the insurance people that I've talked to, that it was a wise solution that will not disrupt the insurance industry as it was threatened to happen. So I'm glad that it did in the end. I did hear that it was tough, very, very tough. And maybe the names of the companies that you mentioned were the ones that in the end helped reach a solution, because it was going to get to a global extent, a black eye for Mexico. And this was, like you said, it hasn't even been covered that much because probably the international press hadn't heard about it. And now that it's resolved, they won't heard about it anymore. So I think it's, in the end, it turned out to be not as damaging as the insurers were afraid of. And yes, we will end up paying that, you and I, and everyone that buys insurance for health or life or whatever, because that extra cost will be transferred to us like it always happens. And that's the way the markets work. Maybe they will lower their margins a little bit for the very few years or the beginning of the years, but then we'll see. We'll see how we end up paying for that. The decision by the government that this IVA has to be not accredited by the insurers. So in the end, it'll be an increase in prices for our premiums, without a doubt.
Yeah, and if this had gone to the Supreme Court, which I think it's already been to, but if it'd gone again, probably, given that the government controls the Supreme Court, the government the SAT, the tax authority here, would have won. So this was very much a political decision that the costs with French and European governments and the US would have, and with Carlos Slim and others in Mexico, the Bayeres family, also the Bayeres group of Balos has a big insurance company, would have been too high. But I mean, on the face of it, insurance, paying VAT on premiums collected, you'd think they should, which was their case, they should be able to offset the VAT on claim payments. But going forward, they won't be able to offset that VAT on claim payments from the premiums. So that changes. And I think this does underline, although it's a relatively satisfactory outcome compared to what it could have been, what the tax risk is. We've seen Walmart in Mexico pay a big tax penalty. We've seen FEMSA pay a big tax penalty. Right now the Grupo Salinas is under being challenged for unpaid taxes, with the government controlling the legal system. These are real risks, and quite a lot of, in the case of Brazil, quite a lot of analysts complained that Netflix hadn't really warned in its guidance or in its kind of communication with the market that this might happen. So it was in some kind of 20F that there was a risk of this, but it wasn't something that people had on the radar. So these things can unsettle and surprise people.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, if he had reached the Supreme Court, we know what the result would have been. And that's why you and I have been mentioning that the risk of the reform, or that the reform increases Mexico's risk level in terms of doing business here, and the capacity for you to get a fair court hearing. And so that's the way it is. It won't make the headlines because it was resolved, but the risks are genuine and will impact in the long run Mexico unless the administration takes stock and changes a few of the things of the way they've done it in the past, which is unlikely, unfortunately.
Just to wrap up, so this week, as I mentioned at the beginning, Eduardo's earnings seasons, only about half the companies have reported, so probably makes sense to look through the earnings next week. The early indications are that most consumer companies are reporting pretty weak numbers. Liverpool had challenging numbers in Mexico, and among others, banks seem to be doing quite well. Industrial companies basically being affected by the margins of the global margins of the businesses they're in. So albeit still reporting difficult numbers, even if the company itself is going through very positive changes in terms of deleveraging. But other companies, obviously like the silver companies, Peñoles or Grupo México, benefiting from very strong commodity prices. So Eduardo, over to you now. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I think the earnings season will develop over the next few days. I think the consumer companies is quite interesting because of the way the economy has been performing. I think it's not doing that well, as we have said. The remesas have slowed down. Things are not looking promising, but we have to wait for the last quarter of the year. Maybe things will pick up for the benefit of everybody.
So it's a real pleasure to have with us today Sebastian de Lara. Sebastian is the Chief Expansion Officer for the fintech Finsus. How are you, Sebastian?
Damien, I'm well, thank you. It's an honor to be on your podcast. I'm very happy to be here and to have a great conversation with my friend Damien.
My pleasure. So maybe we start off, Sebastian, just telling us a little bit about Finsus. It's received probably a little bit less publicity than the new or Klar or Story or some of the other fintechs out there. Tell us how big it is, who the main shareholders are, what its business model is, just to set us up before we get into the questions.
Absolutely, happy to. Well, Finsus is a SOFIPO, and those who don't know, a SOFIPO in Mexico is like a small bank that has the capability to take deposits, to provide interest on those deposits, and to give credit. So it's managed very similar to a bank. However, there's a few things that it cannot do under regulation and some thresholds that it can't surpass. but that's basically what a SOFIPO is. So we are a SOFIPO. We've been in the market for 13 years, but truly we became Finsus as our essence now 4 years ago when we went digital. Carlos Marmolejo, my boss, our CEO, and Norman Hagemeister, our chairman of the board, decided to turn Finsus, when they acquired it 4 years ago, turn it into this digital SOFIPO to really enhance Mexicans' access. And this is going to be surprising. Everyone says access to credit. Here we say access to savings, to investment. So what Finsus does is that it essentially takes money from users, from those who provide deposits. They can invest that money in different options that they have, whether it's a fixed investment or whether they want to have it cash on hand. And with that, we take that money and we lend it out to SMEs. And it's been quite a good project. And what it has managed to do is grow its our portfolio up to 12 billion pesos. And we have over 16 billion pesos in deposits. It's been an organic growth. So Finsus is really a company that has been growing the old way, bootstrapped, so to speak.
One of the things I noticed in your numbers, Sebastian, was your very low cost of risk. Your non-performing loans plus your write-offs are, I think, about 2% in the second quarter. Whereas for the credit card, fintech's obviously a very different segment. They're 25 to 30%. But even for an SME SOFIPO, 2% seems very, very low. And I think it's one of the reasons you've been able to achieve profitability for the last 2 quarters, which also distinguishes you from some of the other fintechs, which are still losing money for the most part. How do you achieve such a low cost of risk or such a high quality loan book?
No, that's a great question, Damien. First of all, and how I mentioned a bit before, we focus on savings. So our products are focused on that. We try not to have Mexicans, regular Mexicans, in debt. We hate for them to get in debt. We want their money to grow. So our products on the personal side are much more focused on being guaranteed by their savings. This allows them not to default and to be able to really keep a healthy financial life with Finsus. On the other hand, what we do is we lend money to SMEs, as I mentioned, and to those SMEs, we do a very good underwriting. We have an amazing underwriting team, and our credit risk team really makes sure that we can lend the right amount. So one of the things, for example, we focus on is we get the fiscal information from these SMEs, so we know exactly what amount reported that they have of income. So our underwriting allows us to really understand what that income is and how much we can really loan to them without getting them into a lot of debt and into a lot of problems. So that's what we focus on. We're trying to help SMEs grow. We're trying to help people grow their financial situation. And that's what has allowed us to keep an NPL of around 2%.
You've made quite a lot of acquisitions, which are sort of notoriously difficult in the financial sector to pull off. I think you've acquired, and correct me if I'm wrong, Pulpi for wage lending mostly, and
Correct.
Tisipa for SME loans over 150,000 pesos, and Llave Credit a while ago now on liquidity loans for individuals. How you said at the beginning that a lot of your growth has been organic, or most of your growth has been organic. How kind of critical to this impressive expansion in your assets, in your credit portfolio over the last 3 years have these acquisitions been?
They've been very important. One of the main theses here in Finsus is that whoever we acquire, we kind of treat them like a Formula One scuderia. No, they have their own captain. So we bring their founders, we bring their CEO, they become a part of the Finsus team. They work here at our offices, they receive a salary from Finsus, etc., and they operate their business within. So that's really been key for success, no? Because these people, they created their baby, and they still have their baby with them, just inside Finsus, and that has been extremely good for us. We've acquired a few others, Root and Distrito Pyme. Distrito Pyme has essentially become our loan team to SMEs, and they've done an extraordinarily good job at that. Anticipa, that you mentioned, is a new. It's relatively new. They joined about 3 months ago when we finished the acquisition. They are already providing loans to SMEs, and it's a really interesting business because they're doing it through their card sales. So there's an analysis of what that company is being able to receive in income through card sales, and with those card sales, we're able to see how much we can loan to them, and they pay back through those same card sales. So it's a very interesting business through their point of sale machines, and it's really an amazing technology that we've acquired along with Juan Fernandez, who's the founder, and his team, and we're really happy to have them with us because they're doing an excellent job. So it's really a lot about making sure that they can be a part of Finsus. There's the right mindset, there's the right culture, and once that's there, they receive the full support, because here we have all our legal team, our financial team, obviously compliance, etc. So we help them grow within us.
Because it could be dangerous having lots of little banks within a bank, or lots of financial entities within a bank. And do you have a sort of consolidated chief credit officer or chief risk officer that sort of makes sure that everyone manages the capital of the firm, wisely?
Absolutely. They essentially become a product within Finsus. So you don't have 7 different chief risk officers running around. No, we have it consolidated. They agree to work with those members of the team, and it's what really allows us to basically function as one entity and not be a lot of different small things. As you mentioned, that could be very risky. So we're quite conscious of that, and what we're trying to do is to make sure that they see themselves as a part of Finsus, which I think that's what has occurred in all cases, and it's really allowed us to grow. So part of our growth is thanks to those companies that we've acquired.
So it's been reported in the press that you're applying or you have applied rather for a bank license. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, we applied for a banking license in October of 2024, so almost a year ago. And we've advanced quite a lot. We have a wonderful relationship with the Banking Commission, with the Mexican Central Bank, with the Ministry of Finance, and any other entities that are involved. And it's really allowed us to also do a lot of soul searching within Finsus and to say, you know what, we are essentially going to become digital bank, and we want to become the best Mexican digital bank out there, and then grow also to Latin America. And in order to achieve this, it's essential to have that license. I think we're in the home stretch. It shouldn't take too long until we receive an approval. As you know, it's quite a long process. You provide information, then the authorities come back after all sides have analyzed it. They have more questions. You answer those questions. So it's a back and forth that takes a while, but we're very confident that we've done a good job there. I'd say we're very close to obtaining it. I can't really say how long it'll take because processes are different, and we're seeing changes in the Banking Commission. But it's something that Finsus will obtain, and that will really allow us to get that final leap, which will take us to the next level and become Mexico's best digital bank and Latin America's best digital bank.
But what will it enable you to do that you can't do now? I mean, payroll lending, is that where you're going to, I mean, you're already doing payroll lending, but will it enable you to scale up on payroll lending and make it less risky by automatically deducting payroll from the loans, the interest on the loans that's due?
It's not so much about lending because we're very strong there. We have an agreement with the EAMS, for example. It's more about having payrolls within Finsus. So really providing the full ecosystem for SMEs, becoming the bank, a digital bank for SMEs. That's really what's going to allow us to provide better services for them. It also allows us to participate more in the market. It also allows us to give people who are saving money a lot more of a feeling of safety because the protection, the IPAB, that we have in Mexico allows people to have their savings protected of up to about 4 million pesos if that hasn't changed recently. And today, Sofipos gives you about 200,000 pesos. So that's also going to give a lot of our users that safety net where they can really bring more money into Finsus, be able to grow with us. So it's something that there's a lot of details that will allow us. And another is the compliance issue. We want to be very, very compliant always, and we're willing to grow that compliance. And as I mentioned earlier, part of our soul searching there was let's think as a digital bank now. So what we've established within Finsus is really a feeling that we are already there. Our banking core is ready. Our technology is ready. Our teams are ready. Our structure, our governance, all of that is already set in place. So basically, when we obtain the license because first you obtain the license and then there's a process to start operations. When we get the green light to start operations, we really don't have to change anything. We will just have better thresholds and more opportunity to provide more and better products for our users.
How do you? I talked to a couple of people before this interview, and they said, "How's sort of Finsus going to compete with these massively funded global VC-backed fintechs like Klar and Story and Nu, and now Capital with a K and Confio and Covalto, and there's a bunch of them out there. Plus, of course, all the traditional banks. What do you think that they have? Lots of money. They have data science. In the case of Nu in Palo Alto, they bought kind of AI firms. They have allegedly hundreds of PhDs in engineering or data science and so on, helping them with their credit models. How does sort of Finsus kind of compete against that?
Well, first of all, we highly respect our competitors. We take them very seriously, and we admire when they're able to do wonderful and amazing things. However, I think that our value proposition is a lot different from theirs. So basically, when you report back to VCs, what you need to provide is growth. No, growth is one of the things that they first ask you to give. So one of the things that we've seen is many of these companies that you mentioned and others basically just give out a lot of credit cards. So they start to acquire a lot of users because everyone wants a credit card, and that's all right. That's fine. That's their model, and we respect that. But that's not ours. What we're saying is instead of quantity, we want quality. We want quality of users. So we're providing those users, like I mentioned before, the opportunity to save. We're starting from the savings side and not the credit side. And that's the main differentiator. So we have about over 500,000 users at Finsus, and we're happy with those 500,000 users. We're growing every single day. Every day we acquire more users, and sometimes we have amazing months where we grew in the tens of thousands of users. But these are people who are saving money. They're not asking for credit, and that's the big differentiator, because we believe that their lifespan with us will be a lot longer. In other cases, for example, maybe they have that credit card, in, and we've seen that their NPL, the companies that you've mentioned, has grown a lot, especially recently. And maybe they have that credit card and they don't use that account ever again. And in our sense, we feel that people, when they come to Finsus, they don't leave. And that's the main differentiator. Sure, it's wonderful to have almost unlimited funds to do a lot of marketing campaigns and all of those type of things. But we are really focused. I mean, we do marketing campaigns within our own budget, but we're really focused on providing a better and long-term service rather than just acquiring users and showing millions of active users as the ones that you have mentioned. But it's different for everyone. If we started very small, we started with a portfolio of about 100 million pesos. Today it's at 12 billion. So we're seeing that growth, and we're happy with the way we're scaling. And as you mentioned, Damien, we're already cash flow positive. So that's really one of the things that we're very, very proud of. We don't need to depend on VC money to continue to exist. We are completely on our own.
So how do you acquire your customers then? I mean, I don't see you. I mean, obviously, you're on the credit side. You're more focused on SMEs. You mentioned that you have this alliance with the IMPs, I think. What are your main distribution channels if you're not spending tens of millions of dollars on billboards in Reforma like Plata, Nudu? What are you doing to acquire your customers in an efficient way?
Well, one of the surprising things is that there's a lot of word of mouth, which is something that's quite amazing, and we're very proud of. But obviously, our campaigns are focused on showing this opportunity that users have in growing their money with us. And we're very focused on the digital side. We believe that that's where people, if they are already digital, that there's a huge opportunity to acquire users there through social media. There's a lot of influencers that talk about us without us having to pay them anything, which is also quite amazing. And then on the other side, we are very much focused on financial inclusion. So we go out to communities. We're present in 2/3 of all of Mexico's districts, for example. So we're everywhere. And that really helps us in our growth, because whether it's a woman in Jalisco who uses us so she can receive money from her daughter in Mexico City and then pay for her utilities and pay for her airtime on her phone, all those type of things, or whether it's a small business in Nuevo León, or whether it's a person who makes a fair amount of money and is wanting to put their savings with us. So it's really, we don't have, for example, an ideal user profile. Our ideal user profile today is any person that can open a bank account in Mexico legally. That's our user persona, and it varies so much. Obviously, they require certain digital knowledge. It's not that hard. We believe that our app is very easy to use, but that part is essential. So also one of the things that we're working on with the Mexican government is to find ways to digitalize the country at a higher rate. People have more access to the digital side of things, then it'll make their life much more easier for them to have access to formal financial products.
And Sebastian, what's the end game? An IPO, selling to a bigger player at a fat margin compared to what you paid, compared to the capital you put in? Just pay dividends to the controlling shareholders?
So, the first thing in the horizon is the banking license that we already talked about. The second thing would be an IPO, will be an IPO. We plan to have an initial public offering in about 3 to 4 years, maybe less if things go faster. We want to continue working with Mexicans and Latin Americans so that Finsus can continue to grow and always be that best digital bank out there. And the way to do it is through that IPO. So obviously then provide dividends to shareholders and have the opportunity for anyone out there to become a shareholder. That's one of the things that will also enable that fourth tier of growth that we see out there. So we're very excited about that. We're starting to build that plan. It's one of the reasons why I joined Finsus, and it's one of the things that I have been asked to take care of by our CEO Carlos Marmolejo. So I'm very excited about that part. We might become one of the first Mexican fintech IPOs, if not the first. So that's very exciting as well.
So on that, Sebastian, and moving on a little bit to one of your previous roles in life, you were the CEO of the FinTech Association. So you have a broader kind of understanding of the challenges and opportunities that fintechs in general face. Mexico's had no fintech IPOs. I think Brazil, depends how you define fintech, but maybe 5 to 10 in Brazil. Why do you, and then digitalization of the financial sector is much lower in Mexico than Brazil, Colombia, Chile, pretty much you name it. Codi's been a bit of a failure. Dimo's been a bit of a failure compared to Pix, at least. Why do you think Mexico hasn't had any sort of homegrown fintech IPOs? Why do you think Mexico sort of struggled to transition away from cash to digital money?
I think that's a great question, Damien. One of the things that we should recognize, though, thinking on the positive side, is the amount of fintechs that there are in that have come out of Mexico. The last report from Finovista was over 1,000 fintechs or companies involved in fintech, and that's a huge amount. No, you compare that with other countries that you've mentioned, and they are a lot lower. And we have quite a bit of fintech unicorns. So there's a lot of value there. Think that the stock market in Mexico for a while has had its issues. It has shrank. There's probably less listed companies in Mexico than there were 80 years ago, which is something that's pretty crazy. And that's, become quite a barrier. And, going public in a place like New York, for example, NASDAQ, it's not that simple, no? Obviously, it's amazing what New Bank has done and how they're growing. And we've seen them grow that they're thinking of growing into the United States. That should be very interesting. But we have so many different services and so many different ideas and so many amazing entrepreneurs in Mexico that if you put them all together, the value that's there is very, very large. I think that, so considering the timing and all those type of things, I think we'll start to see IPOs in the next few years. It would be natural, no? There are many of these fintechs, are on their D rounds or have already passed their D rounds. They received a lot of investment from very important VCs, whether it's SoftBank or any others. And if they start to, their next step has to be an IPO. No, they're too big to be really acquired, or they would have to be acquired by a giant. And they're also too big to fail. They're not going to be allowed to fail. So I think that IPO is something. Now, you'll probably remember, probably before the pandemic, being profitable was not what VCs were pushing for. It was growth, 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 growth. Now it's switching, and so you're seeing a lot of these companies talking about becoming profitable. And Finsus has already done it, as you mentioned. We've been profitable since a bit over 2 quarters ago, and we'll probably start seeing these companies start thinking about that, and then we'll start seeing that growth. And another is always, the importance of having a good relationship with regulators, and because I've always believed, and we believe that at Finsus, is that regulation can also enable growth. It doesn't have to, keep it down. So the possibilities are endless for the fintech market in Mexico. It's growing a lot. We're seeing a lot of players from different parts of the world trying to get into Mexico, and that's a very important indicator, no? So I truly believe, answering just the final part of that question, is that we'll see those IPOs. They haven't arrived yet, maybe because of many other variables that aren't really part of the fintech scene. And once that happens, it'll be very interesting to see how many people start to invest in these companies.
I mean, David Vélez has said in a couple of podcasts, including one with White Paper, I think, that in his view, the Mexican regulatory authorities have been overly focused on financial stability, maybe still sort of scarred by the tequila crisis 30 years ago, and insufficiently focused on innovation and the benefits that can bring the country and the customer. Do you agree with David Vélez on that point, wearing your old fintech CEO hat?
Well, I think the first part of it, the fact that regulators have been extremely focused on stability, is definitely true, and I think that's very important. And we've also seen that there have been a few companies, not fintechs, but financial companies or institutions even, that have failed. And the way that the authorities in Mexico have reacted to that has been fairly positive. So it's important that they're focused on that, because we need to be very responsible as fintechs or as any company within the financial sector in Mexico. So responsibility is a huge issue for the regulators, and I think we need to take that with a lot of seriousness and have that be a top priority. The second part, I mean, I can see why he says it, but I'm seeing a lot of positive changes within the view, and also who are regulating the market. No, I think the new president of the Banking Commission, Angel Cabrera, is a person who I've had the opportunity to have a professional relationship with for several years, and I've seen that he's very focused on innovation, and I think that's wonderful news. For example, I've seen also positive changes within the Mexican central bank, where they were seen as the ones that were most against innovation, now are much more innovative. People like Oton Moreno in the central bank, he's always thinking about innovation and seeing what can be done better, and analyzing, as you mentioned, Demo and Cody, and thinking how he can really reactivate that. So the conversations with him are focused solely on innovation, and they're very passionate and really quite wonderful. And in the Ministry of Finance, you see it as well, and you're seeing changes. For example, they sent Roberto Laceri, who was the chief of staff of the Minister of Finance, to run NAFIN and Bancomext, who has a very innovative point of view of how to do things. So I think that, maybe it was something that was an issue, but I'm not seeing it anymore. I'm actually seeing a lot of opportunity to innovate in Mexico. So in that sense, I would have a bit of a difference with the great David Vélez, and hopefully he changes his mind in a few months and sees that change that I'm seeing.
Well, let's hope you're right. Obviously, actions matter more than words. So what the great thing is that Finsus, with actions, is growing so rapidly, and over the last 2 quarters at least, profitably. So thank you very much, Sebastian, for that. That was very, very interesting. Good luck.
Thank you, Damien. It was wonderful to be here on your show, to have a wonderful chat with you. And you always have friends here at Finsus, and everyone who's listening, you can always count on us.
Well, that's it for today's episode. We hope you enjoy it. We'll be back next week with more on what's moving Mexico's business and financial world. Don't forget to recommend us, rate us, and subscribe. Thanks for listening. See you next week.